Ezekiel and the Valley of Dry Bones, a journey of faith and hope. Amid the Babylonian exile, the prophet Ezekiel receives a vision of restoration that transforms his life and that of his people. United by faith, the Israelites are spiritually reborn, upheld by the promise that one day they will return to their homeland. Ezekiel is a young priest and prophet living in exile in Babylon, during a dark time for his people. Israel lies in ruins, and its people, captured and exiled, live under the oppression of a foreign government. Hope seems to have faded, and a sense of abandonment spreads among the Israelites. Each day, Ezekiel witnesses the pain and despair on the faces of those who share his exile. He feels the weight of his responsibility, a mission he does not yet fully understand but knows is crucial for the spiritual survival of his people. However, he also feels the frustration and pain of being far from his land, living among foreigners who neither understand his faith nor his culture. Amid these anguished moments, Ezekiel begins to question divine purposes. Why did God allow such destruction? Why did he let his people perish and be taken so far from their home? He fears that the Lord may have distanced himself forever, abandoning Israel to its fate. The divine calling. In this atmosphere of doubt and despair, Ezekiel has a supernatural experience that changes his life forever. One afternoon, while alone in a silent, deserted place, he senses a powerful, overwhelming presence surrounding him completely. A voice, strong and clear, echoes in his mind. It is the voice of God, calling him by name and transporting him, in a vision, to a valley covered in dry bones. The vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. Ezekiel finds himself in a vast valley. The ground is covered with bones scattered everywhere, dry and lifeless. The silence is oppressive, and the scene is desolate. He feels the deep sadness emanating from this place, a sorrow that seems to reflect the spiritual state of his people. These bones, he realizes, represent Israel, a spiritually dead people, without hope, without life. The divine voice speaks again, breaking the silence and asking Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel, astonished and unsure of what to say, replies, "Lord God, only you know." The command to prophesy. Then, God commands Ezekiel to prophesy over the dry bones, declaring that the spirit of life will enter them, and they will rise again. Though hesitant, Ezekiel raises his voice and begins to prophesy. As he speaks, a sound starts to echo through the valley, a growing noise, like the sound of bones moving and coming together. He watches, amazed, as the bones begin to assemble, forming complete skeletons, which are then covered with flesh and skin. But even though they are now whole, they still have no life. Then God instructs Ezekiel to call upon the Spirit to breathe life into those bodies. As he does so, a powerful wind sweeps through the valley, and Ezekiel watches in awe as the bodies come to life, rising before him as a strong and numerous army. The meaning of the vision. God explains to Ezekiel that these bones represent the house of Israel, which says, "Our bones are dry, and our hope is lost. We are completely cut off." But the Lord promises that he will open the graves of his people and bring them out, leading them back to the land of Israel. Ezekiel then understands that the vision is not merely about physical resurrection but a promise of spiritual restoration and hope for his people, who are living in a state of despair. The rejection and doubt of the people. After experiencing the powerful vision in the Valley of Dry Bones, Ezekiel returns to his people, carrying in his heart the mission to convey a message of hope and restoration. He is determined to share what he has seen, believing that this promise of rebirth will be like a balm to his people's wounded hearts. However, he soon encounters a major obstacle: the profound disbelief and discouragement among the exiles. Years of oppression and memories of Jerusalem's destruction have embedded a sadness and pessimism that are almost palpable. Many Israelites have lost faith in God, feeling that they have been abandoned forever. When Ezekiel tries to share the vision, some simply refuse to listen. Others mock him, claiming that his words are empty, promises they can no longer believe. Ezekiel then faces his first challenge: how to restore faith in a people so deeply scarred by pain. At first, he feels frustrated, almost unable to bear the burden God has placed on him. He fears that his words may not be powerful enough to reach his brothers' hearts. Oppression and hostility in Babylon. Beyond the disbelief of his own people, Ezekiel and the other exiles face constant oppression from the Babylonians. Local guards and officials frequently humiliate the Israelites, attempting to subdue whatever remains of their pride and identity. Ezekiel finds himself in a challenging position. He is a spiritual leader, but his people endure constant abuses, hunger, forced labor, and isolation. In a moment of great despair, Ezekiel witnesses a scene that deeply marks him. A few young Israelites, unable to endure the misery, attempt to escape in search of food and water but are captured and severely punished by the guards. This event causes Ezekiel's heart to waver. He questions how he can speak of hope when the reality around him is so bleak. The revelation to the people's leaders. Resolving to press on, Ezekiel decides to call a meeting with the elders and leaders of the people, hoping that if he can convince them, they will help him spread the message of hope to everyone. He recounts his vision of the Valley of Dry Bones in detail, describing the sound of bones joining together, the wind that brought life to the bodies, and God's promise that the people of Israel will rise again. During the meeting, Ezekiel is confronted by a leader named Nathan, an elderly man who witnessed Jerusalem's fall with his own eyes. With a bitter look, Nathan accuses him of giving false hope to the people. He argues that the suffering in Babylon is a deserved punishment and that it is foolish to nurture illusions that God will intervene at this point. Moved by Nathan's words, Ezekiel responds with a firmness he didn't realize he possessed. He declares that the vision is not an empty promise but a guarantee of Israel's restoration. He asserts that God has specifically called him to be the messenger of this promise, and although the suffering is great, it is only temporary. His words stir some, but not everyone. Nathan's disbelief and the skepticism of other leaders remain a powerful barrier. Internal obstacles and personal struggles. As he deals with his people's rejection and criticism, Ezekiel begins to experience an internal conflict. He feels pressured and lonely, questioning whether he is truly capable of fulfilling the mission God has given him. He recalls when, at the start of his calling, God warned him that the people might be stubborn and resistant to the message. Now, living this reality, he feels the pain and burden of being a prophet to a people who seem unwilling to be saved. In his solitary prayers, he asks God for guidance, wondering if there is any way to strengthen the people's faith, if he should perform some sign, something that could prove that the vision is true. But God remains silent. Ezekiel understands that part of his mission is to persevere even without seeing the immediate results of his efforts. A new ally, Miriam. Amid the hardships, Ezekiel meets Miriam, a young Israelite who has also been exiled. Miriam lost her family during Jerusalem's destruction and, despite her youth, carries a deep wisdom. She listens to Ezekiel's words and is one of the few who wholeheartedly believes in the vision he shares. Miriam becomes an important ally, helping Ezekiel spread hope among the younger people, who have not yet been completely consumed by despair. Miriam and Ezekiel begin walking through the camps together, talking to people, sharing stories of faith, and holding moments of prayer. Gradually, they become a light amid the darkness of exile, encouraging the Israelites to believe that the Valley of Dry Bones could be a reality for them, that God still has plans for Israel's future. First signs of change. Over time, the presence of Ezekiel and Miriam begins to bring small changes. Some people start to believe in the vision and resume their spiritual practices, such as prayers and songs they had left behind. They begin to gather in small groups to remember the stories of their ancestors and strengthen their identity as the people of Israel. The initial resistance persists, but a seed of hope is slowly germinating. The turning point. The heavenly omen. A divine sign. Weeks turn into months, and despite the small signs of rekindled faith, Ezekiel still feels his mission is incomplete. He notices that, although some have begun to believe again, many still live in despair and bitterness. Ezekiel prays tirelessly, asking God for a clearer sign, something that can touch his people's hardened hearts directly. He seeks a miracle, a visible sign of the divine presence to convince those who still doubt. One night, while Ezekiel is praying with Miriam, the sky transforms. A storm suddenly forms, with lightning slicing through the sky and thunder roaring, yet not a drop of rain falls. The sky, illuminated by the lightning, seems to echo the voice of God, creating a supernatural atmosphere that all the exiles can feel. Many Israelites emerge from their tents, gazing at the sky in awe and fear, wondering if this phenomenon is a portent of something significant. Ezekiel rises and, with courage, calls out to the gathered people, "The Lord of hosts is calling us." This is his sign. He sees us, and his promise of restoration is true. The storm without rain becomes a powerful symbol for the people, as if God himself were affirming his presence in their exile. Ezekiel's sacrifice, a hard decision. Shortly after the celestial event, Ezekiel feels it is necessary to make a personal sacrifice to further strengthen his people's faith. He decides to fast, withdrawing to an isolated area where he spends days without food or water, pleading with God for a direct intervention. Ezekiel believes that if he can show his people his total dedication, perhaps more hearts will open to the message of hope. During the fast, Ezekiel experiences a series of visions. He sees images of a restored Jerusalem, with its people returning to the city in joy and singing hymns of praise. He sees families reunited, children running through the streets, and the city walls standing once again. These visions give him the strength to continue, though physically he becomes increasingly weakened. As Ezekiel struggles with his physical frailty, Miriam becomes his caretaker. She visits him daily, bringing water and tending to his basic needs. The community begins to notice Ezekiel's sacrifice, and, over time, many start to see his faith as an example they should follow. Even some of the most skeptical individuals begin to draw near, curious about Ezekiel's spiritual strength and the seriousness of his mission. The transformation of Nathan. During this period, an unexpected change occurs. Nathan, the elder who once opposed Ezekiel, begins to reflect deeply on his own attitudes. He observes Ezekiel's fast and the impact of this sacrifice on the people. Touched by the prophet's dedication, Nathan decides to speak directly with him. When he meets with Ezekiel, Nathan confesses his pain and skepticism. He reveals that he lost his entire family during the siege of Jerusalem and has carried deep bitterness against God ever since. He feels betrayed, unable to understand how the Lord allowed such destruction. Ezekiel listens attentively, feeling Nathan's pain as if it were his own. Ezekiel responds to Nathan with compassion, explaining that the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones was, for him, a reminder that life and hope can emerge even from the deepest despair. He believes the suffering of exile is temporary and that God will use this trial to transform and strengthen the people of Israel. Moved, Nathan begins to open his heart to the possibility that faith may still have a place within him. A ritual of renewal. Inspired by his conversation with Nathan, Ezekiel proposes a ritual of spiritual renewal. He calls the people to a symbolic ceremony by the banks of the river Chebar, where they are exiled. He believes that if everyone participates in an act of purification, such as a symbolic washing in the river, it can mark a new beginning for each of them, a preparation for the promised return to the land of Israel. On the night of the ritual, hundreds of Israelites gather, many bringing their families. In an act of faith, Ezekiel leads the ritual, praying and thanking God for the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, for the promise of restoration, and for the divine presence that remains with them even in exile. The people, moved, begin to step into the river, washing themselves as an act of spiritual renewal. The shared vision. During the ritual, something extraordinary happens. Many of those present begin to experience a collective spiritual vision. It is as if Ezekiel's vision manifests within their own hearts. They can visualize the Valley of Dry Bones and feel the divine breath, the wind that brought life to the bones. This event becomes a turning point in the people's faith, as they now share an experience of restoration that strengthens their hope. Ezekiel, deeply moved, realizes that he has finally managed to convey the divine message to his people's hearts. From this moment, a new flame of faith and determination arises among the Israelites. They are still in exile, but now they believe, with greater conviction, that returning to their promised land is possible. Nathan's new commitment. At the end of the ritual, Nathan approaches Ezekiel with a transformed expression. He states that he is ready to support the prophet's mission and help the people maintain their faith. Nathan commits to sharing the vision with other exiles who did not participate in the ritual, carrying the message of hope to the most distant places where the Israelites are scattered. The spiritual transformation of the people. After the renewal ritual on the banks of the river Chebar, the people of Israel begin to experience a profound change in the way they live and view their exile. Those who once lived under the weight of despair now share a newfound inner strength, fueled by Ezekiel's vision. Families who had lost their faith start gathering for moments of prayer and song, remembering their traditions and God's promises. For the first time, Ezekiel feels that his mission is bearing fruit. He observes the people transforming, as if the prophetic words he announced about the valley of dry bones were taking shape in their lives. They are spiritually rebuilding themselves, like the bones that came together in the valley, gaining flesh and skin, reclaiming the dignity and spirit of Israel. Spiritual practices, such as daily prayers and the reading of sacred laws, are resumed, and a network of support forms among the exiles. Babylonian challenges and persecutions. However, this new flame of faith and unity does not go unnoticed by the Babylonians. Local guards and authorities begin to notice the growing resilience of the Israelites and see it as a threat. Their desire to keep the people subdued leads them to increase surveillance over the exiles. They forbid mass gatherings and try to disperse the small groups that gather to worship. In response, Ezekiel, along with leaders like Nathan and Miriam, organizes secret meetings, leading the people to gather in more distant places, away from the authorities' watchful eyes. Tensions rise, but the people are determined not to give up their newly rediscovered faith. Ezekiel finds himself once again in a position of leadership, needing to find ways to keep the community united and strong, even under the threat of reprisals. The strength of community. To cope with these difficulties, the Israelites start forming small mutual aid groups. Each group has a leader who maintains the connection with Ezekiel and the other leaders. They share food, care for the sick, and support each other in times of need. This unity helps them face the daily challenges of exile, reminding them that they are stronger together. Miriam, with her empathetic nature, becomes a key figure in this movement of solidarity. She visits families who are still hesitant to join the groups, encouraging the women to participate, telling them that every contribution, no matter how small, helps keep Israel's faith alive. With her support, the people begin to see unity as an act of resistance and faith, a way to preserve their identity amid an oppressive culture. Ezekiel's reflection and personal growth. During this period, Ezekiel goes through moments of deep reflection. He realizes that his mission is more than just conveying a vision. It is also about keeping the essence of the people of Israel alive. He understands that God chose him not only to proclaim a glorious future but to guide the people through hardship, supporting them and reminding them of who they truly are. With Miriam constantly by his side, Ezekiel feels strengthened but also contemplates the weight of his responsibility. One night, he confides in her, confessing his doubts and fears. Miriam listens patiently and tells him that faith is not just about visible miracles but about the courage to continue even in darkness. This conversation deeply inspires him, renewing his determination. An act of civil disobedience. In an act of courage, Ezekiel decides that the people should celebrate an ancient Israelite feast, an act of faith and cultural resistance. He knows that the Babylonians disapprove of any celebration tied to Israel's culture, but he feels that this is an opportunity to strengthen the people's identity and show them that even in a foreign land, God is with them. The celebration is organized in secret, with each family bringing what little they have to share. When the day finally arrives, the people gather in a secluded area, and Ezekiel leads the ceremony, recalling the ancient stories of liberation and God's covenant with Israel. For the Israelites, this celebration represents a victory over despair and oppression. They are, even if briefly, living as the chosen people, without fear, without shame, united in worship. Consequences of the brave act. Despite their precautions, the celebration catches the attention of the Babylonian authorities. Armed guards invade the ceremony site, interrupting the event and threatening everyone present. Ezekiel is brought before the head guard, accused of inciting a spiritual rebellion among the exiles. They intimidate him, declaring that this religious resistance will be crushed if he continues these subversions. However, Ezekiel does not waver. With determined calm, he tells the head guard that the people's faith cannot be destroyed, for it is a divine gift. His words, even in such a tense moment, resonate among the Israelites, who watch in silence. Ezekiel's courage inspires even more respect and admiration, and even some of the guards seem touched by his unwavering stance. Reflection and encounter with the divine. After this episode, Ezekiel spends a few days in isolation, reflecting on the future. He feels the weight of the danger around him, but also realizes that, by protecting his faith, he is indeed living out the purpose of the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. In his solitary prayers, he once again hears the voice of God, comforting him and affirming that he is on the right path. God assures him that Israel's restoration is certain and that the people's faith will be like the wind he saw in the valley, capable of reviving and bringing new life. This moment of connection with God strengthens Ezekiel, who now feels fully prepared to lead the people, even through adversity. He understands that his mission is also a journey of personal transformation, and that the process of restoring Israel begins within him and within each person who believes. The strengthening of the people's faith. With Ezekiel's return, the people sense that he carries an even greater strength, a light that inspires confidence and hope. He resumes his activities with renewed vigor, encouraging everyone to persevere in faith. The community becomes a spiritual refuge amid exile, and Ezekiel watches, moved, as the vision he received in the Valley of Dry Bones gradually comes to fruition. His people, once disheartened and divided, are now a true community of faith, united by the hope of a better future. The final trial. After months of spiritual resistance, unity, and renewal, the people of Israel have grown strong under the leadership of Ezekiel, Nathan, and Miriam. They have become a resilient and united group, determined to keep their identity and faith alive. However, Babylon continues to view this unity among the Israelites as a threat, and in a final attempt to exert control, the authorities impose new restrictions, banning any form of religious gatherings and intensifying surveillance over the exiles. This blow threatens to destabilize everything Ezekiel and his allies have built. Many Israelites begin to fear for their lives and the future of their families. The atmosphere of hope and faith that had grown so strong begins to fade, giving way to whispers of fear and potential surrender to Babylonian culture for a quieter life. Ezekiel realizes that this is the most difficult test of all: how to keep the people's faith alive when the freedom to express it is under threat. Ezekiel's appeal to heaven. Feeling the weight of his responsibility, Ezekiel retreats once more for a period of fasting and prayer, seeking divine guidance on how to face this overwhelming challenge. He cries out to God, asking for strength and a sign that might rekindle the people's faltering faith. In his solitude, he feels the divine presence again, but this time it is different. Not a vision as before, but a profound peace that fills his heart, as if God were beside him, silently affirming his mission. With this renewed strength, Ezekiel returns to the people and calls for one final secret gathering, risking everything. He knows that if they are caught, the consequences could be severe, but he also believes the people need this last moment of unity to solidify the faith they have rebuilt. The last prophecy, the promise of redemption. On the night of the meeting, Ezekiel addresses the people with a solemnity he has never shown before. He looks into each face, recognizing the anxiety and fear that many carry. In silence, he stands before them and begins to prophesy. He recalls the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, speaking with a powerful voice that echoes in the heart of every listener. Ezekiel proclaims that, although they are in a foreign land under the rule of an oppressive people, they are God's people, and the Lord has promised to deliver them. He declares that restoration is certain, and that just as God revived the dry bones, he will bring new life to Israel. Even if they do not live to see the return, this promise will live among them, passed down from generation to generation. As he speaks, the people feel a deep emotion, as if the Valley of Dry Bones itself were present before them, and they were part of that resurrected army, with faith and hope reborn. The attack by the Babylonian guards. At the height of this meeting, as the people are filled with hope and emotion, the Babylonian guards, alerted by informants, arrive at the scene. They interrupt the gathering, demanding that everyone return to their tents immediately. The guards shout threats, imposing themselves with swords and shields to intimidate the people, making it clear that severe punishment awaits anyone who disobeys. Ezekiel, without hesitation, stands between the people and the guards. With a firm voice, he says that the Israelites are breaking no laws, that they are merely praying in peace, harming no one. His courage impresses even the guards, but they refuse to listen and instead demand that he be taken in for questioning. At this moment, The people, united, begin to sing songs of faith. They sing about the valley of dry bones, about resurrection and hope, with voices so powerful and united that even the guards, shocked, hesitate to continue. Realizing the strength of the people's resistance and the power their faith gives them, the guards withdraw, taking Ezekiel as a prisoner but leaving the meeting undisturbed. Miriam's perseverance and the people's resilience. With Ezekiel imprisoned, the people feel the weight of their leader's absence. However, Miriam, deeply inspired by Ezekiel's courage and faith, steps up to lead in his place. She encourages the people to continue gathering, even in small groups, and to pray for Ezekiel's release. She becomes a voice of hope, reminding everyone that, even in adversity, God's promise remains alive. Miriam also brings a message to the guards and Babylonian officials, pleading for Ezekiel's release. She argues that Ezekiel is not a rebel but a spiritual leader who strengthens his people's morale without any intention of revolt. Her persistence and faith even impress some of the officials, and news of the Israelites' courage begins to spread. The miracle of freedom. After days of detention, the Babylonians, perhaps weary of Miriam's persistence and the spiritual strength of the Israelites, decide to release Ezekiel. They realize that keeping the prophet imprisoned might cause more unrest among the exiles and that he poses no real threat to Babylonian power. Ezekiel is freed and returns to the people, who greet him with great joy and gratitude. This moment becomes the spiritual climax for the people of Israel. They realize that, even in a foreign land, their faith cannot be imprisoned, and that God, in one way or another, is always watching over them. Ezekiel's release is seen as a divine sign, a confirmation that the Lord is indeed present with them, as he had promised. The rebirth of a people. Back in the community, Ezekiel thanks the people for their strength and unwavering faith during his absence. He acknowledges Miriam, Nathan, and all those who kept the flame of hope alive, thanking them for being the backbone of the community. Now, the people of Israel feel stronger than ever, knowing that, even under Babylonian rule, they possess a spiritual freedom that no one can take away. The path of spiritual return. After Ezekiel's release, the people of Israel experience a renewed peace and a faith that seems unshakable. The hardships of exile are still present, and the Babylonians continue to impose restrictions, but the Israelites now see these obstacles with new eyes. They have become spiritually strong and united as a true community of faith. Ezekiel's prophetic words about the valley of dry bones have been fulfilled in the hearts of the people. Hope and spiritual life have been restored, and they have become an army of faith and hope. Ezekiel frequently meets with Nathan, Miriam, and other community leaders to organize gatherings, teach the scriptures, and keep God's promises alive. He realizes that, even though they have not been physically freed, the exile no longer oppresses them in the same way, for they carry a spiritual freedom that transcends Babylonian rule. The promise of final restoration. One day, during a prayer ceremony organized for all the exiles, Ezekiel shares a final prophecy revealed to him by God. He declares that, at the right time, Israel will be fully restored and will return to its land. The promise is clear. God will fulfill the covenant made with their ancestors and guide them back to Jerusalem. Even though many may not see this day with their own eyes, the promise will live among them and be passed down from generation to generation. Ezekiel's words are received with emotion and reverence. The community understands that their mission is to keep this promise alive, teaching future generations about their identity as the chosen people and passing down the hope of their return. The impact of a faithful community. As time passes, the unity among the Israelites and their identity as a people of faith begin to influence even the Babylonians around them. Some Babylonian citizens are drawn to the community, intrigued by the spiritual strength of the Israelites. They witness how the exiled people maintain their hope and customs despite adversity. Ezekiel and Miriam begin to receive visits from some curious individuals who wish to learn about the God of Israel, and slowly, the faith of Israel becomes an example for other nations as well. Though still under Babylonian rule, the Israelites have become a respected spiritual force, recognized for their moral strength and unity. This spiritual victory makes them realize that exile, in a way, has strengthened them, creating a new generation of Israelites who deeply understand the value of their faith and culture. Ezekiel's final thanks. One evening, Ezekiel gathers with Miriam and Nathan for a moment of reflection. They look back on the months of struggle, challenges, and spiritual victories, realizing the profound transformation that has taken place within the people. Ezekiel thanks Miriam for being his ally and for keeping hope alive when he was imprisoned. He acknowledges Nathan as a leader who, though initially skeptical, was transformed by faith. The three feel that they have fulfilled the calling God gave them, serving as the voice and support of a people reborn spiritually. A community moving forward. In the years that follow, the promise of return remains alive, told at each gathering and passed down to every child born in exile. The community becomes more than a group of exiles. They are a nation of faith, with an unwavering identity regardless of where they are physically. Every family, every person, carries in their heart the promise that God will fulfill the vision of restoration and that Israel will once again be a prosperous nation in its own land. The celebration of unity. In one final celebration, held in memory of all the moments of resistance, the Israelites gather to praise God and reaffirm their hope. Ezekiel leads the event, praying and thanking God for never abandoning his people. He reiterates that the exile did not extinguish Israel's faith. On the contrary, it strengthened it. The people sing hymns of praise, and the atmosphere is one of profound gratitude and unity. Each person present feels that, even far from Jerusalem, they are home with one another and in the presence of God. This final ceremony marks the spiritual victory of the people of Israel and the end of a journey of transformation and rebirth.